afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Hello. Welcome to my session. First of all, thank you to the conference organisers, particularly Susanna, for inviting me today to be here and to speak to you. And for those of you who didn't quite realise, there's been a change in the programme because someone wasn't attending. So if you think I'm going to be talking about dealing with a hemorrhage at a home birth, I'm not. So if you want to leave now, please do. So I presume that you're all here to listen to my session on social media. I will be talking later on this afternoon about another topic, about the campaign for normal birth in England. So just to introduce myself, my name is Sheena Byrom and I'm a midwife from England. So I'm delighted to be here. I worked for the National Health Service for 37 years and as a midwife, and during that time I didn't really engage much at all with social media. I wasn't really interested in it. But when I took early retirement 4 years ago to do a PhD, I started to look into how I could use social media to help me. And I found it incredibly useful. So what I'm going to do now is just run through a few slides with you just to show you how I think it can help. And particularly for those of you who are working in countries where you're trying to radically change systems, I think that it's a useful tool to use, and I hope this will demonstrate why. So, I just have to get my, I don't think I can use the, so here we go. So first of all, to say that this is the normal way that we would talk to mothers and listen to women in the childbirth period. So we would sit next to them and listen to them and have conversations with them. That's the sort of conventional way that we hold communications. But it's changing. And this gentleman said that, you know, social media is where patients are, it's where people are, where they're hanging out. And so if we want to find out information from women and those who are using our service, we have to do what they're doing. So it's the way we can try to change to do that. And these are sort of a few of the ways that you can use social media. So I like to call it online communities rather than social media platforms, because that's what they are in actual fact. They're little hubs of communities, sort of gatherings where people can either have open conversations or closed conversations and be sort of share information as well as glean information. So there's lots of so just to kind of talk to you about them all. The top one is Instagram. Then we've got Facebook and LinkedIn at the bottom left-hand corner, YouTube and Twitter. And just to say that all of them, and there's more besides, but all of them interlink with each other. So you can have them so that one connects with the other. So if you take a photograph, for example, using Instagram, which is the little camera type thing, and you have it linked to your Twitter feed, then it sort of shares and goes backward and forward, so you can have them all talking, which is very useful if you're developing a campaign to change something. So today I'm going to focus mainly on Twitter, and just to kind of, a lot of times, I happen the other day, delegates ask me, what's the difference between Facebook and Twitter? And really, in a sense, Facebook is for those of people that you know, and so your friends and family, for sharing information with them. And Twitter is generally for people that you don't know, but you'd like to connect with. So that's a general overview. It doesn't always work like that, because as you know, sometimes Facebook is used to develop campaigns to pull people together and to share information. And particularly when you have a closed Facebook group, it can be sort of a confidential sharing of information. But in general, that's the difference between the two. And Facebook, your posts stay there for longer. And when somebody comments on a post, it goes back to the top and sort of is very, very sort of visible. But with Twitter, the feed runs very, very quickly, and I'll show you that later towards the end of my talk. So here we go. I made a little film clip about when I was trying to engage midwives using Twitter, because in the United Kingdom, lots of nurses use it, but midwives were quite reluctant. So I made this little film and I hope it works. I'll just see if I can get it to. So that was just sort of my little film that I made to try and help people to realise how good it was. So this is an old slide now, but we can only imagine that this is enhanced. But if you look at how many nurses are using social media and using the internet to access information rather than looking at the red word sort of on paper, it's just growing by the day and it's just exploding beyond belief. So it's just worth you considering that when you feel a little bit reluctant to join in the conversation. And this is a really interesting infographic, because if you look at the top, it says that 71% of females are using social media. And by age, the top age is around, I think it's age 18 to 29. And that usually is the age that women are having babies. So what we can presume is that that's where women are. That's where the ones who are having babies and their partners are there on the social media using it. So great way to find out what they think about what we're doing. So just to say, why should we do it? Really, what's the point? This isn't a very clear picture, but it's if you want to use it just personally, just for you, not professionally, you just want to use it sort of like Facebook, you can do. So you can just connect with people, keep up with the news, what's going on, find out. And if you have a particular interest, like mine's photography and knitting, so if I didn't want to use it professionally, then I would just link into people with those interests, and my knowledge would enhance instantly, because there's just news things coming through all the time. But if you want, like me, to use it professionally, then there's so many reasons why it's beneficial. Because we can just connect throughout the world instantly, never been done before. And this is an example of a midwife she's called Jenny Clark, and I talk about Jenny all the time. There's a lot of midwives that have done similar things to her, but she had a passion for skin-to-skin contact, and still does, after going to a lecture from Niels Bergman. And she became so passionate about it that she wanted to find out more. So she joined Twitter and got loads of information. And then she decided to change practice in her maternity unit to try to, and it's quite difficult. So she wanted to enhance skin-to-skin contact, particularly after caesarean section. And the anaesthetists and some of the obstetricians were quite obstructive and said they didn't want that to happen. So she, by hook or by crook, she sort of tried to influence, and she did it by painting on the theatre wall. So she got one of the painters to paint, don't forget skin to skin. So it was quite horrifying. She got into trouble for it, but then she told everybody on Twitter that she'd done it and got a little nickname for it. And then other maternity units started to pick up on this story and said to her, you know, what happened after you painted on the wall? So she told her story using Twitter. And basically what happened is that they got so fed up of her doing things that they started to do skin-to-skin contact. And now it's almost 100%. So because she's told this story through Twitter, other maternity units in England have picked up on it via this, and they've started to promote it as well. And because she's done such good work around skin to skin now, she's actually been invited to see the Prime Minister. And what she says is it all happened because of Twitter. She wouldn't have had the confidence, because what it did is it gave her support, because immediately she started to tell people what she was doing. The support came in from all different places, and she's a great communicator, so she carried on that conversation. So it kind of changed her career. She's now become sort of quite a high-profile midwife in the country, not just in her own trust. And what she was just saying here on a tweet, this is just one of her tweets, is that she can share evidence-based practice at the speed of light, so it's much quicker than any other way. These are also midwives from other parts of the world who I set up this scheme where midwives joined in to become Twitter buddies, and I wrote all their names on one of my blog posts, and we did it before the International Congress of Midwives. We did it so that we could be a collective voice there using Twitter and share the information throughout the world at live information. So these student midwives wanted to be Twitter buddies. We called it a Twitter buddy scheme. And they were saying, they're from the Yemen, and what that student midwife was saying, that they're told they have to use it in order to build relationships and to get information. So that's interesting, isn't it, that they're using it as part of their programme. This is an example of using social media in terms of learning, extra learning, that there are, midwives conferences going on. This is the free online conference, the International Day of the Midwife Conference, that's virtual and free. And so that's shared via social media. So we find out about these things through Twitter and Facebook, and it's all online. And as I say, you can do it in your own home. You may have heard people talking about hashtags, and certainly the hashtag for this conference, I think I may have been the only one tweeting, but usually there's at least 20 people tweeting in a conference, and hashtags are used, and they're a bit like search terms. So if you imagine, this was the ICM in Prague, this was their hashtag. So it's hashtag ICM Live, and I was employed by the ICM to tweet at that conference, so I gathered all the tweets up at the end of the day. And basically, all you need to do is in a Google search engine, put hashtag ICM Live, and all the messages that were sent out on that day, on those 3 days, they're all there collectively in one place. So it's like gathering all evidence, if you will. And also there's something called Storify, which is like that again is a social media platform where you gather all the tweets together and you can actually make a presentation from it and just share that online as well. The interesting thing about, the positive thing about hashtags is that if you are not at this conference, but you wanted to see what was going on, you couldn't afford to come, you could sit at home and go onto Twitter and put the hashtag in and watch the feeds coming through all the time. And at ICM, they were going out by the second because there were so many midwives tweeting. So it's sort of being able to be present in an event without actually being there. And sometimes I run things like, midwife tweet chats, and I run something called We Midwives, which is open to all the midwives throughout the world. And we run chats twice a month. And you can come up with a topic, it can actually be your subject, and we would just host it for you. And during an hour, we have a chat, and midwives from all over the world talk about, we have doctors as well, we doctors, and we kind of chat with each other. And at the end of it again, we have a collective voice of what was said during that conversation. So it's a fantastic way of just being together without actually being in the same room. So the hashtag, just remember, it's like a search term. That is how you find out what's been said at a particular conference. So it's really, really useful. And this is just another example, midwives in Indonesia wanting to be Twitter buddies. And they sent me this. I've never met these girls. I don't think I ever will, probably in my life. They were there in their home, they were at a conference, I think. It wasn't at ICM. And they just, if you look, Sajfam SB, that's my Twitter handle, that's my name, that's what I call myself on Twitter. And so they sent me this little message to say that here we are, Twitter buddies in Indonesia. So spreading around the world. And then when you think about what we're here for, this conference, to try to change and influence maternity services, this is just such a perfect medium, because Facebook and Twitter, but I just want to draw your attention to this woman called Millie Hill. And if you Google her, we were just looking, Maria and I were just looking before you came in. Millie is a mum in England, and she's also a journalist, so she writes beautifully. She had 3 home births, and she set up a movement called the Positive Birth Movement. And whilst it's not about promoting home birth or promoting physiological birth, really that's what she does in the end, because the groups, the way they're set up and run, they're all facilitated by women from the community. They don't cost anything. She has all the resources and she has the hub, and all you do is message her or tweet her or Facebook her and ask her for the information. And she's got something like 240 groups in the UK and 100 groups around the world. And we just looked before, and there's none in the Czech Republic. So if anybody wants to set one up, all you have to do is contact her and she'll send you the information. So it's this global movement to try to influence childbirth. And what she also does is she writes for a journal, a free online journal called Best Daily. And what she does is she tends to pick feminist topics, so topics around childbirth that really matter to women, and you can ask her to write on a particular topic. And what she's saying here in this tweet is she's actually tweeting the BBC and a particular person who's very popular at the BBC called Jeremy Vine, and she's telling him that women's feelings matter, and she's linked him to her article, and she said it had 42,000 shares, and it was actually just within a week. So if you're an academic and you think of how many times your academic article is seen or viewed by the people you really want to be seen, then it won't be as much as that, will it? So it's just a way of getting messages out much quicker and more efficiently than any other way that I could possibly think. So these shares happened all because of Twitter, just at the speed of light, like we said before. And just to mention 2 other, courtesy of lovely Ricardo here. This is another example. Ricardo told me that he actually gathered individuals to take part in the countrywide rally was through Facebook. Now, in my lifetime, I've been trying to change maternity services for 37 years and more. I've never had that ability we've never until now had that ability to do that. We've always had to do it before email, through letters, I was part of the Association of the Radical Midwives in England, and we just had little group meetings. We could never influence at this level, so it's just enormous, really. And then, of course, Tony Harmon, do you all know about One World Birth, the One World Birth Project? Well, she really made it happen through social media. When I talked to her about that, she says it just wouldn't have occurred as it did if it hadn't have been through the ability to spread and share things widely. So they're just 3 examples. I could go on and on. And there's other reasons why it's good, is that there's no hierarchies. So we don't have, we might be tweeting a politician or somebody working in the BBC in England, but it doesn't matter, you can do that. You've got every right to do that. Nobody will stop you from doing it. They might not respond to you, and they might not read it, because if you've got somebody who has a lot going on, they might not even pay attention to it. But it doesn't mean to say that you can't stop doing it. And the good thing about it is that if I tweet somebody that's got a lot of followers, because that's the thing, you look for people who have a lot of followers. And so if I tweet somebody who has, say, 5,000 followers, as soon as I copy them into a message, potentially 5,000 people see it at that moment in time. So it's just incredible. And so there is no hierarchy. So student midwives, healthcare assistants, doulas, obstetricians, everybody that works, activists, all are on the same level playing field when we use Twitter and social media. And so this is what my daughter and I wrote an article for Midders just recently about the use of social media. And we very often hear about virtuous circles helping to enhance maternity services. So when you work with obstetricians and the collaborative models of care where you work well together, what happens is you have a virtuous circle. Rather than having vicious cycles of spiralling down, we really can make changes happen. And what myself and my daughter described is that we can have virtuous social media circles, and that's happening in my career right now, because I'm connecting with lawyers, with researchers, with obstetricians, with neonatologists, with birth activists, and with mothers from all backgrounds, and we together are joining force to make change happen. So that's what we like to call it, these fabulous circles of change. So, there are some concerns, and I very often hear health professionals saying to me, well, I'm a bit worried about it because I've heard people getting into trouble, and, we heard from Daniela yesterday a message about, someone writing something and it wasn't well received. But rather than keep looking at the negatives, we have to address some of the things that aren't very good about it, and think about all the positives, but just to address some of the negatives, there are things that you have to be careful. And most certainly recrimination. People are worried about getting into trouble if they write the wrong thing. But you have to remember that you shouldn't behave any differently on social media than you do in your normal life. So if you are respectful to others in your normal life, then you have to be the same there, because remember that once you write something on social media, it's seen, or it seems immediately. And my rule of thumb is, if I have to think twice about writing it, I don't write it. And there's another thing, another saying, and forgive my language, I don't know whether it's translatable, but one person said that you must never write when you're pissed or pissed off. So that's, you're drunk or you're cross. So, you shouldn't write anything in anger. And sometimes I have to stop myself, because I'll see something written and think, that's not right, or the evidence isn't right here. You just have to think about it, just as you would in a normal conversation. So just be careful of that. And time, people say, I haven't got time to do it. Ken said, was it you, Ken, that said, I get enough emails already. How am I going to deal with all these Twitter things? But you don't have to look at it. It's not something that is compelling to do. I have to say I've got a bit addicted. So I do like doing it because I feel connected. But you don't have to, so it hasn't to be seen as a pressure. And there are examples of chief executives using it beautifully, and people in senior positions, politicians, real kind of leaders of the countries, different countries, using social media and using it well because they're finding out what's going on. So, and it only takes an hour to get started at the most. Skills, you don't have to do it. Find somebody who does know how to do it. Sit next to them and just do it. And just watch what's going on for a while before you get involved. Sometimes organisations block access because they're worried about what's going to happen. And that's a bit old-fashioned, and I think that's going to be changing very soon. That's certainly in the United Kingdom. So, we've almost finished. Just remember that you are what you tweet, not what you eat, what you tweet. So you have, your professionalism is very important. Whatever you use, whatever medium you use or platform, it's really important to maintain your integrity. And certainly for me as a midwife, I would want to be on social media who I really am. A kind, compassionate midwife who cares about others and who wants to support people and help people along the way. So that's what I like to portray. And so I wouldn't be anything different on social media as I am in real life. So just keep that in mind, and be careful. I have to talk when I talk to midwives in the United Kingdom or anybody about it. I say, just be careful that you don't post things on there that will potentially discredit you as a person and your profession. And this is a really interesting thing that me and my daughter thought up after. There's a fantastic Marion Mead quote, never doubt a group of committed citizens can change the world. And what we've said is that we can do it now at the press of a button on a mobile phone. So how do you do it? There's all this query, what do we do about Twitter? It looks a bit complicated and Facebook seems easier. Well, all you need really is a computer or a tablet or a phone, and most people have those. And then you just need to start off. And basically, how long have I got? I'm the chair and I don't really know. What time is it now? I've got one, but it's not behind.
22, they say.
22, yes it is. I'll finish now, but just before I finish, I'll just quickly show you if it works. It might not come up. Whilst it's thinking, has anybody got any questions?
question but a comment.
I'm Jette from Denmark. I can tell you that I would not have come to this conference had it not been for social media. Because in 2012 there were this conference in The Hague about human rights in childbirth. And I had a Facebook before that, but I never used it. There were some students that had done it for me, and they kept picking on me that I needed to do something, but I didn't. But then in this conference, because they set up a Facebook group after that, I kind of started linking up with people, and that made me go to Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia to meet up with a group of women who are trying to change childbirth. So I think I can hear what you are saying, and I saw it work.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it does. I noticed that I just made friends with Ricardo, sat here at the front last night, on his Facebook page, and I've been watching what you've been writing, and Ricardo really is you're using Facebook as Twitter, because you're doing lots of posts every day. It doesn't matter. You can do that. There's not right or wrong, but that's the difference. If you imagine, I probably would just put one post at the most a day on Facebook, but Twitter you can do it by the minute, by the second, and not everybody will see it. But then again, if you're at a conference and you put the hashtag in, you'll see it. So I'm going to demonstrate to you how the hashtag works. So this is my Twitter site, and it's all come up in Czech. So I'm not sure what I'm seeing now, but there you go. So this is showing how many tweeties. You call them tweeties. That's brilliant. I'll have to change that. And these are how many people are following me at this moment in time. And following you doesn't mean they're stalking you, and it doesn't mean you have to communicate with them. It just means that they're interested in what you write. So they're mostly midwives and doctors and doulas, but there are a lot of childbirth activists and women and other people too, nurses for example. But I follow. It's gone. Where's it gone now? Oh, I've got to sign into it. Can't do that. I follow. Where's the little light thing? Here. If you look here, I follow 1,455 people. But the key is to follow less than you are followed, because potentially you see all these that come up. If you look at your Twitter feed, like you would your Facebook page, you're seeing it, but it moves all the time, because the more followers you have, the quicker it goes up, because it's just like a rolling screen. But you can pick up on things, and you can search for things using a search button. It's not showing up on here, but you've got like a little search button on, so you can search for various things. But if you just look at what's been going on this morning, this is just an example. There's an obstetrician called Jim Thornton in England who's written a paper about micromorts and risk having a baby. I personally think it's a horrendous paper, and it's just scaremongering. There's absolutely no need to write this paper, it's just done for scaremongering. So I told him so. And then all of a sudden, all these people start joining in this conversation. And Chris McCourt's got involved, and that's what happened. So you have a debate about things, but it's really good because never before have we been able to contest things. So how many times have you read in a newspaper something and you've been fuming because it's actually all wrong? But what you can do with social media, and particularly Twitter, because you tend to get most of the academics using Twitter, that you can actually challenge things and put it out there. And when it works well is when you do blog, when you have a blog site, or you have a space where you can write things. I personally have my own blog site. So if I see something that's coming up a lot, I gather the experts in, the academics, to write something, and then I send it out there as a blog, because on tweets you only have 140 characters. You can't write reams and reams and reams. But I haven't got time to tell you all the absolute benefits. If you want to ask me later, I can willingly show you. And another thing I just want to say to you is that you don't have to put things out in public. You also have a little a mailbox, so you can actually mail each other instantly on Twitter. So you can just do a private message that nobody else sees, but you have to be following each other. And the other thing is, just remember your digital professionalism. So what you write here under your biography is really important, because that would make me follow people depending on what they write there in their biography. So I have to say, I've met the most amazing practitioners and the most amazing individuals through Twitter. And we've actually met in real life now, and we know each other by the time we meet them. But I wouldn't have met them on Facebook unless I was in a closed group for a particular issue. But I've met them on Twitter, so that's it really. So has anybody got anything else before we move on? Anything they'd like to ask me? But I'm willing to talk to you afterwards if you want me to. No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you want to pop yours up? Should be there. So I'd like to welcome Maria Mills-Shaw now to give a talk on the supervision of midwives in the United Kingdom, and I hope you'll find this useful in your quest to change things. Thank you.
F5. F5.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. I'm Maria Mills-Shaw. I'm a home birth lead. I work in the NHS service in England, and I'm also a supervisor of midwives. I'd like to say thank you to Susanna for inviting me. What a wonderful conference. I think what I'd like to give you is an idea of a structure that particularly you in the Czech Republic might find useful. It's a historic structure that we've had in England since 1902. Since about the 1800s, there was a big debate about the professionalisation of midwifery. In 1863, doctors became registered, and in 1902, midwives became registered. And at this point, there was a little bit of dichotomy between midwives because there was growing professionalisation of midwifery, but also a strong history of women just looking after women. At the same time, there was a lot of anxiety from doctors about midwives being a registered professional body. We had this Act of Parliament and we were a profession all of a sudden. What that meant was that midwives had to register with the Central Midwives Board, and at the same time that this happened, we had inspectors of midwives, men watching over midwives, and it was, at this time, midwives were working in the community, they were doing home birth, that was their realm of expertise. It was about men looking at women, checking them, making sure those midwives were behaving. So the historical context of supervision comes from a very patriarchal perspective. It wasn't a good thing for midwives, although some of them couldn't actually see it. But it was a structure that survived. And I've got 20 minutes to talk to you, so it's a bit difficult to tell you the whole history of English professional midwifery. Over the years, what we've got to is a system where all nurses and midwives in England are registered and regulated by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Alongside that, there is the local supervisory authority, and this is a very specific thing to midwifery because it was about that dichotomy between doctors and midwives, that power battle. Now, in the UK, we've got geographical local supervisory authorities, As you can see, there are 10 in England, 2 in Scotland, 1 in Wales and 1 in Northern Ireland. They're all headed by a local supervisory authority midwifery officer. So she is the top of the organisation there. In Wales, they've got 2 LSAMOs. So what does the LSA do? Its functions are to provide a framework of support for supervisory and midwifery practice. It receives intentions to practice data for every midwife practicing in that LSA. And in the UK, what happens every year, a midwife has to notify the authority of her intention to practice midwifery. Every midwife must meet statutory requirements for practice, and there has to be an initial and continuing education programme and training for supervisors. The LSA leads the development of standards and audit of supervision. It determines whether to suspend a midwife from practice. So this is about midwives regulating other midwives. It's available to women. I mean, that's one of the key things that we use it for today. It's available to women if they need to discuss any aspect of their care that they can't discuss with their midwife on the ground, or their obstetrician, or their GP, and they can access the LSA directly. One of the problems with that is actually engaging women to want to do it, because we've had 100 years of supervisory activity in England, and still the people that it matters most to are the women, and they don't always engage with it because we're not very good at giving them the information about how to. In our own hospital now, what we do just very recently, after 112 years, is we put a little sticker on their notes, and the sticker on their notes tells them how to access a supervisor, so that it's right there on their hospital notes. And we investigate all aspects of clinical alleged misconduct or lack of competence. So who is the supervisor? The supervisor of midwives, she is a practicing midwife. She would have had at least 3 years practice experience, and she has to be nominated by her peers. So her midwife colleagues have got to think she's a good enough midwife, a good enough mentor to actually become a supervisor. She'll receive supervisory training, and it's about 6 months. It's an academic training, and there's a portfolio of practice that has to be examined. And then she's appointed by the local supervisory authority. And this is quite an important thing for you to think about, because she's not appointed by the hospital that she's working at, she's appointed by a different body. So it takes her outside of the management of the hospital and outside of that bureaucracy. The standard is a caseload of 1 supervisor to 15 midwives. And that's a very lovely standard. In practice, it can be much higher, and it very much depends on the hospital, the staffing, how many supervisors you've got. In my own hospital, I recently had a caseload of 1 to 24. In a neighbouring hospital, they were up to 1 to 34. What we do is annual review for every midwife in the caseload. So our standard is that we must meet with them at least once a year, and hopefully more. And the annual review is that you have to make sure that she's registered with the Nursing and Midwifery Council, that she's paid her fees to that body, that her continuous professional development is up to date, that if she has any issues in practice, she can talk about them to you. And she doesn't just do that at the annual review. Any time of day or night that you're working, she can contact you. And you would hope that she would do that, because you want to nurture her to be a confident midwife. If you ask midwives in England what they think about supervision, one of the things that they will tell you is that it's quite a punitive thing, because they focus on conduct investigations, and they think, if they have a good career, they never make a mistake, they'll meet their supervisor once a year, that's it. If they do make a mistake, or there's an allegation of clinical or social misconduct, then they will be subject to investigation, and they will find themselves going through a process of examination. All supervisors are part of a team, and as a team we have 24-hour access for midwives and for women. So if a midwife has a problem 24 hours a day, she can call the on-call supervisor, discuss the problem, and we give advice or support. If a woman has a problem, she can, in the same manner, contact the hospital switchboard and be put in contact with the supervisor. The supervisory review and investigation process is instigated when there is an allegation of misconduct, an allegation of clinical competency, and specifically when we are triggered by serious untoward incidences, clinical problems, and there's a very definitive list about that. For example, maternal death, death of a baby, hemorrhage over 2,000 cc's, unexpected admission to an ITU or HDU unit, unexpected admission to neonatal unit. All of those things go through a management process, but the supervisory process is distinct. It's not about what happened in terms of management, it's about what happened to the midwife and the woman. And the idea of supervision is about protecting the woman, not the service. So, the gist of this, for you guys that are working with home birth, is how to use it for home birth. And it has got its problems. It's not a flawless structure. But if you use it properly, it can really help your women. The whole tenet of it is woman-centred. It's about protecting the woman. So you put her in the middle. We have a lovely little booklet that we give to women about how supervision can support them. And what you see along there is we've got the LSA up the top there, the midwife who's the main carer of the woman. We've got nice guidelines that in the UK are the standard for caregiving, and we've got the supervisor if we need anything else. Now for me, in my practice, I'm the home birth lead. Home birth in England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland is a given right. It's an institutional thing. Women can have it, and generally it's not a problem. The problem we have is engaging women to want to have home birth. That's a bigger issue. My caseload is mainly high-risk women, and these are the women that are very, supervision's a very good mechanism for getting them care that is safe, making sure they understand their risk factors, and advocating for them. So for us in England, a high-risk home birth is a woman who has grand multiparity over 6, has had a previous caesarean section, is having a multiple pregnancy, her baby's breech after 37 weeks, she's had a previous postpartum hemorrhage, a previous manual removal of her placenta, her body mass index is over 35, and in England, obesity is a major problem for us. A diabetic mum, a mum of a baby who's been identified with an anomaly scan on ultrasound, a baby who's been identified as being growth impaired on ultrasound, a mum whose waters are ruptured for more than 18 hours before the time of the birth, and a mum whose baby's died. So if those women are planning a baby at home, we classify them as high risk. And what we do with these women is we plan with them. We instigate a process, we instigate a meeting with them at their home. So we'll go out, have a conversation with them, listen to their story, and that's really a very important part of the process. If we want to know what has motivated her to express an idea that she wants to have a baby at home, what's her story? Is it because she's had previous traumatic experience in hospital? Is it an idealistic thing? And that will take a long time, because you don't know until you get there. We discuss the evidence and the guidelines for that particular scenario with her. And then we hope that we give her enough information that she can make a decision that's right for her based on all the available evidence. And then she birth plans. She tells us what she wants from the birth process. We don't care plan for her, because when we're giving care at home, we're following a normal birth pathway, so we follow nice guidelines for intrapartum care. We don't do complex care planning specific to the high risk, because it's a very black and white situation at home. Everything's going to be perfect for her regardless of her risk, and the minute there's a deviation from the path of normality, that's the point of transfer for her, if she agrees to it. And then this thing, documentation, documentation, documentation. And we have to be very specific that the woman knows what the situation is. So what we do is we write a letter to her, and in the conversation that we have, we're talking about her taking potential responsibility for her life, and potentially for the life of her baby. If there's an obstetric emergency, there's potential for loss of that life. And we have to tell her that. So what we'll do is tell her in the conversation that when we write to her, we're going to spell it out to her, what the risks are, what we've recommended, what her choice, what she's articulated to us, her choice has been. So it can be quite a stark letter, but if she's warned about it before, generally the woman's very happy to have it, because it does crystallise her idea of what she's doing for herself. So I just want to share a few case studies with you that we've had recently. This is a very recent home birth that we had. It was her 8th pregnancy, her 7th baby, and she'd had 2 previous caesarean sections. The first section that she had was her first baby. She had prolonged rupture of membranes, her labour didn't progress, and she ended up with a section 4, what we term failure to progress. She then went on to have 4 other babies, actually 3, and then the 5th baby that she had was another caesarean section because the baby was presenting as a transverse lie in labour. So she transferred, had a section, then, pregnant again, she had another couple of home births. In this pregnancy, the thing that she was more increasingly aware of was that she had a high body mass index, and women are becoming much more aware that this is a risk factor for them. BMI over 45 is a significant risk for her, so she didn't engage with the service. She thought, well, I'm having my 8th baby, they won't want me to have a baby at home anyway. I've had 2 sections, they won't want me to have a baby at home. And because I'm a bit chubby now, they definitely won't want me to have a baby at home. So she didn't have any antenatal care. She went and had a couple of private scans. And then I think towards the end of the pregnancy, she got a little bit anxious about the prospect of her free birthing, and she did engage. But she engaged at a hospital that wasn't in our area. And the way home birth works in England is we have quite geographical patches. So if you live in one area, you come under the auspices of a general hospital usually. If you live in another area, it's them. This woman lived in our area, but she chose another hospital because it was actually closer to her. When they took the booking and looked at the risks, they didn't want to engage with her, so they referred her to our service. And we went out and we had the meeting at her house. She was very well informed. She knew what her risk factors were in terms of her multiparity, risk of hemorrhage, her risk of having 2 caesarean sections before. And the thing that we talked about was, I think it's 92 per 10,000 risk of scar dehiscence after 2 sections. And our guideline is that we want to get them into theatre if they bleed within 17 minutes to have, some kind of positive outcome for them. And we couldn't do that for her from her house to our hospital. So we discussed all of this, and I did write a letter, and I articulated in the letter the risk factors for her, and that it meant that if she did have a scar rupture, there was potential for hemorrhage 2 litres per minute across the placental side, and that would mean possible examination within a couple of minutes. That transfer time would be too long. And generally at home, our response to an obstetric emergency is pretty much the same as it is in hospital. These are basic hands-on skills that any experienced midwife can do. problem is we can't transfer them for the onward support afterwards. So I wrote the letter to her, and of course, midwives in a team that are providing care for a home birth lady, when there are high risks, they do become very anxious about it. And one of the mechanisms that supervision offers the women, the midwives rather, is that it supports them because they know if the letter's been written, the documentation's been done, and the midwife goes out to the woman and there is a poor outcome, we've crossed all the dots, all the T's, dotted all the I's, and that means the midwife can't be put into a situation where someone will say to her, why didn't you do this, why didn't you do that, because they know exactly what to do. So send a memo to the midwives, just to alert the risk factors to them, tell them what's been done. And for this woman, we could alert the ambulance service so that if we phoned up to transfer her in labour, she would be identified as a priority transfer. She's on their system, and they don't give you the spiel that normally happens when you phone for an ambulance from a home birth. Interestingly enough, when I went to do the first meeting with her at her house, I told her I would be writing a letter to her, and she said, fine, it's all okay. And then she asked me to go back to her house at the weekend when her husband was there, just so I could go through it again with him. And she was very adamant that she would have a baby at home. So I went to the house, read the letter, well I didn't read the letter, had the conversation with her, and then I said to the husband, I said, you've seen the letter I've written anyway, haven't you? No, he hadn't, because she hadn't shown it to him. So I said, well, I think you really do need to read the letter because it's the black and white scenario. And the reality for us as a service provider is that if I'm writing this letter, it means that you understand what you're doing in terms of taking responsibility for your decision making. So that if there is an adverse outcome, and in this situation potentially it could be loss of life, then the husband still has to participate in that. He's got to be taking responsibility for knowing that his wife might not be there, his baby might not be there, and his 7 other kids might be left there with him. And it was, I think, quite a shock to him. Anyway, I mean, if you look at it, the balance of her history, she had quite good history. She was chubby, BMI 45, but she'd had 6 normal births. One of them had been an unattended home birth because no one got there in time. So the balance was, it wasn't that bad. What happened was she went into labour and she had a significant meconium. And at that point she was, I think, in a position of trust with us, so she came into hospital. And so had a good outcome. This is another girl who had a BMI of 51. And again, she was very aware of the obesity management that we have. It was her 3rd baby. Her 2nd baby, I listened to her being born on the doorstep because she was a planned home birth at that time, and she was a lot slimmer then. And I got to the house, still on the doorstep, the baby was born, went in, did the blood pressure on the dad, I think, because he was so shocked. But the 4th pregnancy, the 3rd baby, she was very anxious about engaging again because we'd had a new consultant come in who had a very aggressive obesity management program that he'd instigated, and she'd heard about it because people talk. So she didn't book till 33 weeks, and she had an interview with a midwife that was doing the booking, and the midwife called the consultant, and we had a specialist midwife for obesity management at the time. And the consultant made her cry. He said, you could die because your BMI is so high. And she said, well, I don't really want to, but I'm not coming into hospital for this baby because I hate hospitals. She had essential hypertension associated with her body mass index, and it was exacerbated by hospital admission for her. So she wanted a baby at home. Again, we went through the process of meeting at home, documenting, and she had caseload care, one-to-one caseload care, so she could phone any time she wanted, which is what we do. She had home birth and water. And for her, it was the best thing. It was the most sensible thing for her. Because if she'd have gone into hospital with essential hypertension and a fear of hospitals, her blood pressure would have gone up anyway. She would have been treated completely differently. But at home, her blood pressure was manageable, she was calm, she had a physiological experience. The only thing we did with her that was different to our normal home births was she had thromboprophylaxis afterwards because of her BMI. That's baby George. She wouldn't let me show a photograph of her, but he's a lovely baby. This is a girl who chose to have her twins at home. And of course, you know, twins are not a normal physiological birth these days in our hospitals. Most of them are having sections, unfortunately. This girl had had a baby before at home. She had 2 babies at home, actually. Got pregnant with her 3rd baby, who were twins. And we went through the same process. This is one born, and we were still waiting for the other one at that stage. And then they were a week later. A girl who's had 2 previous sections at home. And the reason I got called in to see her was because she was crying in the clinic where the obstetrician was saying, you know, I'm planning a section for you. And she was saying, well, you know, I'd really like to have a normal birth. And at that time, we had quite restrictive admission criteria for our birth centre. So our birth centre hadn't been up for very long. And so women that had had previous section couldn't access the birth centre. So for them at the time, it was a very black or white, you either do it this way or you have to have a home birth because a woman has a right to choose home birth in England, and that's how they were locked out of hospital care. And that's what she did. She cried and she said, no, I'm not coming in, I'm going to have this baby at home. And so she did. The interesting thing for her though was she'd had 2 previous sections in the first stage of labour. And when I got to her, she was very, very scared of her labour. And she needed to be told it was okay to be frightened. And what she said, she wanted, give me the fucking gas and air. That was the first thing she said when I went through the door. Just give me the fucking gas and air. And I thought, God, no, I can't do that. Because if I give you the fucking gas and air, you're going to be out of your head and I'm not going to be able to help you. So I said, no. No.
Gas and air's
Entonox, yeah.
No.
So we calmed her down, and she had a baby. This was her first vaginal baby, and it was as if she'd had 5, 6 vaginal babies, because she did really, really well. She popped that baby out on the bathroom floor, no problems. So this one is me showing off now. This is my 6th grandson. He is Rupert. It's my daughter's baby. Of course it is, it's lovely. Her first baby was born at home. Her 2nd pregnancy was a twin pregnancy. The twins had twin transfusion syndrome, so it was a much more complicated pregnancy. And she had a cesarean section at 33 weeks for those babies. Him, she wanted to have at home again. So the reason I'm showing you this is because it shows you the structure of the LSA in it. The LSA publishes guidelines to support midwives. It publishes a guideline for women choosing to have free birth, for example. It's one of the things that midwives worry about is women making choices that don't involve them. And the LSA does publish a guideline to support women choosing that and to support the midwives that they may or may not come into contact with for that. And the LSA also published a guideline for caring for friends and family. So for me, you know, she's my daughter. I was there at number 1. I wanted to be there at number 4. And, you know, it was taken as read in a way. But the safety aspect of that is one, when you're looking after a woman at home, whoever she is, there's a massive emotional investment that you put with her to gain her trust, to get good outcome from her, and that's a reciprocal thing. When it's your own daughter or your own friend, it's an additional responsibility. And also, for the person on the other end of it, my daughter, there was that assumption that it would be me and her. And I'm not the person to discuss that with her. It has to be someone outside of that circle. So for midwives looking after friends or family, you have an additional meeting with another I am a supervisor, but another supervisor to make sure it is what she wants. You know? And again, document, and again, lovely little baby at home. Now, I use supervision as a mechanism for advocating for women that are choosing home birth with high risk. But there are women that choose to have things done in hospital that we can, as clever midwives, help them with. This was a request from a woman who wanted to have a caesarean section. It was her second baby. The first baby had been a normal, spontaneous vaginal delivery, and she'd had what was documented as a second-degree tear. Now, she hadn't had this baby at our hospital, so we didn't have access to the notes from the previous delivery, and although we requested them, they didn't come through for us. What she told us was that for 5 months after the birth of her baby, she'd experienced fecal incontinence, and nearly 3 years after this birth, she was still having pain when she had intercourse with her husband, and her sex life just wasn't very satisfactory for her. She was very traumatised by that, you know, understandably, and she didn't want to have a vaginal examination. Now, interestingly enough, when midwives want doctors to do caesareans, they don't seem to want to. When you don't want them to, they do seem to like to do them. And in the UK, we've got a big drive for promoting vaginal birth after caesarean because, one, it's very safe, and also it's cheaper for the hospital, and it's less risky in terms of litigation. So at the moment, we've got a whole band of obstetricians that are very keen for vaginal birth after caesarean section, but they're not always thinking about the individual involved. And what happened for this girl in the antenatal clinic was the obstetrician said, no, you can't have a caesarean section for that reason. She got referred to another obstetrician for a second opinion, and he agreed with the first obstetrician. Luckily, she accessed supervision. And so went out, heard the story, you know, and when you go out, you hear these stories from women when they're in their own home. It does validate the story for them, and it does give them a perception of power that is real, because that's what you're using the supervisory framework to achieve for them. Now, what I said to her was, I can't alter the decision of the obstetrician, you know, that's not in my power. But the thing I can tell you is that you don't have to agree to a vaginal examination. You have to make a birth plan that's cleverer than they are. And for her, the birth plan was decline consent for vaginal examination and decline consent for instrumental delivery if you get to that point. So she made her plan, went back to the obstetrician, and the challenge for the obstetrician then was, if this woman comes into the labour ward, what am I going to do? If I don't do a VE, or the midwife doesn't do a VE, how are we going to know what's happening? And of course, they don't know how to manage that. So, incredibly, well, not surprisingly really, the consultant agreed to a caesarean section for that woman. And the result for that woman was that she was happy at that point. Up until that point, she'd been going through her pregnancy traumatised and fearful and scared, and she couldn't even enjoy the pregnancy. She couldn't even think about having a baby because it was just far too traumatic. So once that decision had been made, she could relax. She knew what was going to happen. She had her section. She was a happy mum. The other thing about that is that for some reason, you know, these things aren't normal. Fecal incontinence, physiotherapy for 5 months after a birth, continued dyspareunia. That's not normal for a woman. And the interesting thing is that no one had ever thought, well, that's not right, what are we going to do about it? And the idea is that if you're there, you can say, you know, we can do this. I thought that was quite an easy one. Just don't do vaginal examination, and then you're going to challenge them and you'll be able to get what you want. But once you've had your baby, ask for a referral to the perinatal clinic. And she says, well, what's a perinatal clinic? And you can tell her. and then you can deal with the problem that's causing all of this in the first place, because she doesn't need to go through her life like that. So the cesarean section won't have changed that for her, it will have just alleviated the risk of it getting worse. So there we go. I'd just like to say thanks to all the women that gave me permission to share their stories, because they really do teach you so much if you just have enough time to listen. And I think the thing that I would like you to take away as a message, you midwives in the Czech Republic that are having such a very difficult time, is sometimes it's about using the structures you've got in place. Sometimes you can't have anything new, but you've got to learn how to get crafty with it, how to work your way around it. And I think that's a good skill for midwives to have. Just be creative, think a little bit outside the box and see what you can do, because you can do it. Nothing's impossible. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. Has anybody, while I put my presentation on, has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask Maria? One over here.
Maybe I can just shout.
Shout.
No, the interpreters need it.
Oh, I guess I can't shout.
Hello. As Canadians, we have not learned how to deal with this concern we have yet. And the concern I'm going to talk about is bullying of supervisors and bullying of people who take positions of power over other women. And I just would really like you to address that, because what you have presented here is a beautiful story. And it's lovely. I mean, it makes me think that's what we need in Canada. But I've also heard about supervisors who are not quite as gentle with women, allowing them to actually have the choices that you've obviously provided them here. And so I would really like you to address that, because in Canada, we do not have a supervisor system. We have a system where you can phone up risk management and talk to them, and they're very, very good about it. And we've recently had twins at home too, and had to go through this quite a bit. But I actually personally had a complaint put in against me 6 years ago, and it was quite a diabolical thing, because it was someone who was actually wanting to take my position, and she was a younger midwife, but she was the head of the complaints and disciplines of the college, and she wielded great power. And it took us 6 years to resolve the thing. The college has totally changed. There's been a lot of changes generally in our system as a result of my case. But there have been about 4 or 5 midwives that are older midwives in Canada that actually left as a result of somebody coming in who felt that they were offering women too many choices. And it was not quite as gentle as what you just described here. So I'm just wondering how, in Britain, you have dealt with the bullying issue.
I can only talk about my own team, but I think it's true for all teams. What happens, women have a right, and midwives have got to be speaking as one. It's no good one supervisor saying one thing and another supervisor saying no. And what you have to do in your teams is you've got to challenge it all the time, every meeting. Make sure that the midwives that are reluctant, or the ones that might possibly be bullying, are addressed. And supervision can actually provide a mechanism for that, because every supervisor of midwives has a supervisor of midwives, and if there's an issue with that supervisor, maybe she's bullying her supervisees, she's not providing advocacy for women, then that can be addressed through that system. I mean, it's difficult. Women are not all uniform. We've all got opinions and we've all got different backgrounds. And it can be challenging for midwives that come from a much higher risk environment, like the labour ward, to understand why a woman might want to choose to do something that isn't in what they perceive to be a safe scenario. But the supervisor's job isn't to impart what she thinks. It's about looking at the evidence and looking at the standard for supervision, which is taking away the personality and providing the information so that the woman can make an informed choice. And if the supervisor herself isn't doing that, then you address it with that supervisor. And if there are, ongoing problems, then you would refer that supervisor up to the LSA MO, the midwifery officer, for the local supervisory authority.
Okay, so what you're saying is if you're not happy with your supervisor, or you're continually finding you're in a conflict with her because you're feeling that the client should be allowed certain choices that she's thinking then you can say, I want to change supervisors.
Yeah. And remember that the way we do the on-call for supervision is this 24/7 thing, and we all take it in turns. So if there's a specific issue on one day, you've got a difficult client, a woman who wants to do something that's outside of a guideline or outside of her normal experience, then it's the supervisor on call that gets the contact for that. So it does help with standardisation. You're not always going to the same supervisor. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I can just see all kinds of issues with it. Because the
Well,
other thing,
Betty Ann, there are all kinds of issues with it. It's not an ideal system, but it's the system that we've got. And what we have to do as supervisors with integrity is challenge those ones that are a little bit stuck in their ways. Often it's because they've got anxieties that they need to have addressed and to become more professional midwives.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria. That was a great answer. I have to agree with Maria. I do think there's good and bad, but it should be individualised and it can be addressed if there are issues. But I know what you're talking about.
Can I just answer Betty Ann then?
Yes.
You can actually... Oh, sorry.
Do you want me to get that one?
Just for example.
I will. Thanks.
Thank you. I think what you were trying to get at was if you and your supervisor have a clash of personality and a clash of styles, can you actually change that? And yes, you can. I had a similar incident several years ago where the supervisor I had been allocated actually bullied me and told me that I was no better, I wasn't qualified to be a midwife, that she was going to downgrade me out of the midwifery until I could actually prove to her on paper that I had achieved everything she thought I should have achieved. And I was really upset because I had been a midwife a lot longer than she had, and I felt that this was quite unreasonable. So I went to my manager. She said to me I needed to go back to this woman and address it. So I did. We didn't come to any satisfactory conclusion.
Well, isn't she's in a position of power over you? That's my concern.
It is a concern, but the system that we have is that it gives you the confidence. We have the confidence to know that they can't do that to us. I know my right is to have another supervisor. If I don't get on with this woman, I can go and ask for another supervisor. Yes, we're asked to address it with them to see, is there a common ground that we can meet on? If there isn't, then you say, that's it, I'm going to have another supervisor. And I was allocated another supervisor, and it was as simple as that. But I think sometimes when you have somebody that you perceive to be bullying you, it colours your responses to them. And you can react rather than be dispassionate in your conversation back to them. And therefore it makes their responses even worse to you because you're not tolerating that, you're going to argue.
For me, really, also, the other thing,
We have to move on. Yeah. I'm just a bit worried that this session, I'm just a bit worried that everybody's going to arrive in ready for the next session. And is that all right? Can we talk about it afterwards? Is that, pick it up? But it's good points, very good points, because it's topically, there's been issues in the past with supervision.
the thing is the bullying.
Yeah, definitely, yes. So, hello again. I'm here again to chat to you this time about the United Kingdom's Campaign for Normal Birth, which has recently changed into the Better Births Initiative. When Susanna asked the Royal College of Midwives to come to talk about this topic, Cathy Warwick, who's the Chief Executive of the Royal College of Midwives, couldn't come, so she asked me to come instead, and it will soon become apparent why. But I'm delighted because it's a topic that's very close to my heart, and I'm really pleased to be telling you a little bit more about what's going on. And actually, the midwives who are in the United Kingdom don't know some of the things that you're going to find out today. So, just let me move this on. So this is a photograph of me when I was a midwife in 1991. And this was a home birth that the woman gave birth in water in 1991 at home. And I'd never seen a water birth, never mind facilitated one at all. So for me, it was a huge step. And for the woman too. She didn't want any doctors present, she just wanted me, and she laboured beautifully and had this fabulous water birth. But the preparation for it was with the supervisor of midwives, and it was to learn how to help a woman to give birth in water. Now, it's significant because she had just checked to see if she needed any stitches. Actually, that's why she's not in the water now. But just take a look at my arms, because they're very wet, because I nearly dived in during the birth. I nearly plunged in because, of course, I was so worried about how this was going to turn out. But it was fabulous, absolutely fabulous. It was just a massive turning point. And the reason why I'm showing you that is because it was such a positive highlight in my career. But things weren't always so good, and actually I want to share with you something that happened to me shortly after that. And I wasn't intending to share this with you, but it's only because some of the conflicts that you're having in your countries, I just felt that it was important for you to understand that sometimes it happens to us too. And I was actually at the centre of a huge litigation case from a home birth. I hadn't done anything wrong at all. And the centre of the case was around the delay in transfer. There was nothing to do with me, it was to do with the ambulance. But when the lawyers couldn't put causation on the fact that it wasn't the ambulance, that actually, even if she had got there on time, there would have still been a large amount of cerebral palsy. They started to pay attention to my practice. And the allegations that they put forward to me were that I failed to tell her that it was unsafe to have a baby at home. But all this was in the paper, this was in the national press and it was in the local press. And it actually affected me greatly. It affected my children, it affected my whole family, and it made me very, very ill. But, and the poor woman, Kate, who really only went to lawyers because the trust, the organisation that I worked for didn't give her any answers. And she was struggling to bring up a child that was very severely disabled. So she spent all night and all day with a crying, fitting child, and the social services didn't give her the right support. So she went to lawyers for help. Well, actually, they touted for business with her, really, at a party. And she felt that if she went down the legal system, then she would get some answers and she would get some money to help her to bring her child up. I'd rather you didn't tweet this or Facebook this if anybody was doing so. And so in the end, I wasn't allowed to speak to her for 9 years. The case took 10.5 years. And this was all going on during my career. But needless to say, I still continued to be a midwife and still passionately believed in home birth and supported this mother afterwards. And we've written about it in a book, and we've also presented together at conferences to show that actually the legal system was the one that caused the most problems in this case. But I only telling you about it because it happened to me, and I know that some of you in the room, it's happened to you too. So I'm kind of one of you, really. So I'm here on behalf of the Royal College of Midwives, and this is really what the Royal College of Midwives does. In its support of midwives, it acts as a professional organisation and a trade union. It teams up with policy and education and training for members and helps us to progress. And it also has UK-wide representation and European global perspectives. So it's very much involved with other international initiatives. And these are just some of the policy and research that they've been involved with, the RCM have been involved with. The one that I'm going to talk to you about is the one at the bottom left-hand corner, and it's called Better Births Initiative. This is because this is a home birth conference. The talk I'm going to give to you is around home birth in the UK. And I'm going to skip over a lot of it because you've already had this information from others. This is one of the mums that I've been supporting with her choices. So here we have an idea of the home birth rate in the United Kingdom, with Wales being on top and Scotland being the least. This is where in England births take place, so mainly in obstetric units. We have 2% home birth rate, 2% freestanding midwifery-led units, which are birth centres, and more babies are born in alongside birth units. So they're the ones that are midwifery-led, that they're attached to the labour ward or the birth suite or whatever, the high-risk obstetric unit. And they're developing very quickly, actually, throughout the country. And this is an idea of the changes in service provision in England. So you can see that obstetric units are decreasing, but we can't be hoodwinked with that because they're actually getting bigger. So it's amalgamations of two smaller ones into a bigger one that gives this picture. You can see that freestanding maternity units, midwifery units, are staying about the same because some open and some close. And alongside units, the purple line, they're increasing, which is very good. But again, this has already been talked about this morning, but you can see that in England we had a huge decline in home birth. In the 60s, it was 35% home birth rate, which dropped significantly because of policy at the time. And you can see this cesarean section went from 2.8% to 4.6% during that time, and is increasing by the day. There was a significant impact. There was an impact of the midwifery-led care policy document changing childbirth, and that was during my career time. And the work that I did was heavily influenced by that document, even though that it's thought that nothing much has changed. I think it has. So here we've just got the regions of England. This afternoon you heard that it's different in different parts of the country, and this kind of shows you that. So there's the most home births happen in the southwest of England. And we have an enormous amount of policy documents that encourage better standards of maternity care for whatever reason. And within those documents, there's a focus on the fact that women should be able to choose where to have their babies, and that there should be a full range of choice available to women, particularly from this document here, that still stands as our template for service delivery. But we've had surveys of women's views, we've had dignity in childbirth survey, lots of different things have gone on within England and the United Kingdom to try to improve maternity care. The reality is, we're not using the research evidence as how we should be. The progress that we're making isn't monitored against any of that strategy that you saw. We've got limited assurance of value for money in the country. There's significant local variations in cost, quality, safety and outcomes. Few women have continuity of care or choice in place of birth. There's a large amount of dissatisfaction. Clinical negligence schemes are increasing, and we've got one of the highest stillbirth rates in Europe. So the evidence tells us, but you've heard this already from Chris McCourt and from others, apart from the fact that we've got the birthplace study, we've got other pieces of evidence that tell us that out-of-hospital birth is not only safer, it's more cost-effective for low-risk women, and it gives better job satisfaction to women and midwives too. And this is taken from the birthplace study. As I say, you've already seen this, and I've kind of highlighted here the differences. And I didn't see Chris's talk, but you probably showed this, Chris, that the benefits are just significant for home birth against all the others. But even though we have all that, even though FMUs, freestanding maternity units and home birth, have the lowest intervention rates, childbirth intervention rates, unnecessary intervention rates, we still have situations where home birth services are withdrawn because of service provision, and we have birth centres closing. So even though we have all that really robust evidence, this is still happening around the country. Which means based on the birthplace study, the number of births in England last year was 700,000 live births. The number eligible for birth centre births, based on a study by James Sandler, which was just published in October, James Sandler et al. 45 to 49% of women should be eligible to have midwifery-led care out of hospital birth. So the number of women actually giving birth in non-obstetric unit settings was 89,000, which means potentially 226,000 women were exposed to routine unnecessary intervention. And this is something that we don't always highlight. We talk about the risks of out-of-hospital birth, but we don't talk about, which is what you said, we don't talk about the risks of having your baby in hospital. So the potential consequences are unsustainable. We can't continue what we're doing in the United Kingdom and in England. We can't, even though it may seem good in one way because of the fact that we have home birth services and out-of-hospital birth services, we're still going in the wrong direction. Well, we're going in the right direction, but a bit slow. Because of the iatrogenic damage, including the epigenetics that is unfolding by the week, we have fear and defensive practice is increasing. Decreased satisfaction levels of staff and women using the service, and a continuing rise in unnecessary intervention rates. So there was a birth of a campaign many years ago during all this, and it was based on the fact that Beverly Beach, for the Association of Improvement for Maternity Services in England, this is a consumer group that many of you may know about. If you don't, go on the website. It's called AIMS, Association for Improvement in Maternity Services. Beverly Beach is the chief executive, and she wrote a paper in 1997 listing 5 interventions associated with traumatic birth, which are ARM, induction of labour. You remember this?
No, it's just tell us what.
Oh, induction of labour, acceleration of labour, epidural, and episiotomy. So syntocinon, basically. And So Sudan, based on this paper, decided to run a study. Were you involved in this, Chris? Were you involved in this study? In 2001, this one? No. Yeah. She looked at births retrospective. She did a retrospective study of births that had taken place in 2 maternity units or 3, and they found that only 17% of prime gravida and 30% of multiples had a birth without each one of these interventions. So she spoke about it at the RCOG, the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists in London, and she formed, with the Royal College of Midwives, formed something called the Virtual Institute for Birth to try to change things, to try to improve the situation. And the aims of the group were these: so they were to generate more knowledge, to try to promote well-being, a well-being approach to childbirth rather than a risk approach, to promote normality as a key political agenda item, increasing its profile and dissemination, to lead on what is normal, ensuring a focus on the whole process of childbearing, including birth, expanding the awareness and benefits of a normality focus on the childbearing process, to provide information to lead and inform policy and strategic decisions, and to serve as a worldwide evidence-based resource promoting the creation of well-being in childbearing for those seeking information about normal birth. The campaign for normal birth ran for several years, and it went from that date, from about 1997 until just recently, when what it did was it not only provides an evidence base, but provides women's stories for you to use, and also some resources like these that can be downloaded from the internet, and they're accessed probably by more countries outside England, outside the UK, than they are in. But great resources on there. This is the new revamped site. And what's happened just recently is because I was part of this group, and during the meetings, it became apparent that there was more to what we were doing, in that we needed to include the antenatal period and the postnatal period, and we needed to look at a greater spectrum to try to influence childbirth. So what's happened is we've just launched an initiative called the Better Births Initiative. So it's actually overtaken from the Campaign for Normal Birth, but the Campaign for Normal Birth is still underneath it and sits with all the resources underneath this initiative. And one of the reasons why we changed it, as well as needing to broaden the scope of it, we also needed to, what was the other reason? Oh, we also needed to bring everything in, to think about positive childbirth and not just normal birth. So we needed to kind of, really focus in on what mattered to women based on information that we gleaned from there. So this is how the new initiative is going to develop, because it's early days, it's only just started. It's going to be looking at the antenatal period, intrapartum and postnatal period as the whole, which it should be, in terms of influencing normality and ensuring that all women have a positive birth experience. And what we want to do is try to help women to achieve normal births for the majority, and normalisation for all women. So even women that are high risk or that are needing intervention, as my two daughters did, that it would be as normal as possible for them in that circumstance, because that's really important. Realising the benefits of continuity of care. So what we're doing is working with academics to try to make sure the evidence is put into practice, thinking about different ways that midwives and obstetricians can provide continuity of care. Implementing solutions to reduce health inequalities across all communities, because there are huge inequalities, I'm sure, in all countries. And what we want to do is try to address that in the work that we're doing. So the activities for the next 4 to 6 months are making sure that we establish approaches to each theme, including the definitions and evidence base. Developing case studies from the UK, and this is really important. What we did in September, we held a colloquium and we invited various people who were highlighted as delivering extremely good services to come to a colloquium and to share how they did it, how they got to where they got to, and how they could help other people to realise the potential within their service. And I think this is really important, because if we keep talking about the bad things all the time and no one addresses what's working well, then we won't progress, it will just become a vicious circle. So we have to try to share good practices where we can. And to make sure that the website is up and running and that we have good resources on there. We're planning an annual conference, I'm not sure whether that's happening, and set up a business case for collaborations for sustainable projects in 2015. And again, that's around sharing. And just before I finish, I want to share with you one area of good practice that will maybe give you hope. And before I start to tell you about it, I want to say that I worked in this maternity unit when it was probably the worst in the whole of England. It's actually in the northwest of England. It's got huge levels of deprivation, social deprivation. It's got one of the highest levels of female mortality, not maternal mortality, but female. High levels of unemployment, and criminal activity is beyond control in some areas. And actually, when I first went to work there, it was desperate. Obstetricians used to look through portholes in the rooms of women. Women were left in labour the whole of the time. Bullying was out of control. It was just dire. And through the years, it's changed dramatically for lots of reasons, but mainly through strong leadership, but also through collaboration, working together with all the health professionals to make it happen. So this is kind of a typical street in that area. It's an old mill town from the industrial area. This is what happens in that service. So it has 6,700 births a year. It has a vibrant home birth service, 3 birth centres, 2 of which are freestanding. And it has a Lancashire Women and Newborns Centre, which isn't a hospital. So women who are high risk go to their own centre. It has all the facilities for high-risk care, but they don't have to go into a hospital where sick people are. And the teams are achieving some continuity. This is the foyer to one of the birth centres, and I have to say, it was just before I left. I used to be head of midwifery here, and just before I retired, I opened up these birth centres. I worked really hard for several years to get them. And this is the foyer of one of them, and it's only been opened for 3.5 years, and it has 1,000 births a year. And women in that area didn't know about birth centres. They'd never been one before, so it's a completely new concept. They won Maternity Services of the Year last year in the United Kingdom. These are little snippets taken. This is the social media site for the hospital, for the service. This is one of the midwives saying Blackburn Birth Centre has had a busy day. We've now had 3,002 births. Watch this space, we're planning a celebration for staff, colleagues, mums and babies. And that's what they do all the time, they celebrate the activity, always. This birth centre is 25 miles, which is how many kilometres? How many kilometres is 25 miles? Do you know? 40 kilometres away from the hospital, and they have 1,000 births there every year. This one's another freestanding birth centre that has less births, but still has a vibrant, all these mothers and babies that came to celebrate their 1,000th birth after opening, but they have less every month. This is the high-risk unit in the maternity, in the Lancashire Women and Newborn Centre. So women can be mobile even though they're being monitored, which I know is common in a lot of units, but if you look at the environment, it's not your normal high-risk areas. They've really worked hard. It's not perfect, there's still rooms that don't look like that, but they're trying very hard to make it good for women who are high-risk as well as low-risk. And this is them again winning their award. But just to say that 30% of births in this maternity service are midwifery-led and take place outside of the hospital. So we're hoping to get it to 50% or at least 40%, but at the moment it's 30%. So I think that's incredible, given that it used to be such a dire place to work, and now it's one of the best in the country. And the organisation that it's based in is actually in financial difficulty. So it's under special measures because the surgical part of it and the medical divisions are struggling, but the maternity service is thriving beyond belief in all that. I had another slide that showed that they were actually saving money based on the birthplace study. They're saving money by having this service as well, so it's not costing more money, they're actually making cost savings. So that's what we want to do in the Better Births initiative. We want to bring these examples of good practice to inspire other maternity units, because it's not like that throughout the whole of the UK. There are there are models of care where it is working well and where they are achieving what we're all striving to do, but they don't know how to do it. So we have to try and support each other and help them to make those changes if we're going to change at all. We can't just keep doing what we're doing all the time. So that's my little granddaughter when she was newly born. She needed to be born by caesarean section because my daughter had severe preeclampsia. She was very severely sick. And Mila was born early by caesarean. And I just keep saying to my daughter when she says to me, "Mum, why are you going away again to do all these talks?" And I said, because we have to try and make it right for when Mila's having her babies. Thank you.